The Trump administration is working to step up deportations by flying people out of the U.S. ICE Air is the agency's charter airline. The flights take people living in the U.S. illegally out of the country. Washington Post immigration reporter Nick Miroff recently boarded one of the flights to Guatemala, and he spoke with some immigrants who were on the plane. Nick joins us now from Washington. So, Nick, what was it like being on board this flight, and was it surprising kind of be sitting there with these folks who are about to be deported?
Yeah, it was certainly one of the stranger flights I've been on, not least because all 95 of the deportees were in shackles when we boarded the plane. They had their leg restraints removed right at the stairway, but almost, for the duration of the flight, they had their hands cuffed in their seats, and the shackles were removed about an hour before we descended into Guatemala City. So that was certainly unusual.
Yeah, Nick, we're looking at some of the pictures that you took of them on the tarmac. It doesn't appear like they have shackles right now, but tell me a little bit more about who they were. Were these immigrants criminals?
Yeah, so there were 88 men, 7 women, just one family on this particular flight. And ICE told us that about half of them had criminal records. I wasn't able to speak to anyone until we were on the ground in Guatemala, and they were released. But as they were leaving on their way, they were finally free from custody and on their way in some cases to meet relatives who they hadn't seen in years. I was able to speak to some of them, and almost universally they said that they planned to go back to the United States, that they had spouses and U.S. Citizen children and jobs and so forth waiting for them back in the United States. And they were, determined to try to get back to them.
Yeah, that stood out to me in your reporting, but also the fact that you talked about the atmosphere, that some of them were actually kind of excited to be going back and to be seeing relatives they hadn't seen in a while. Acting ICE Director Matt Albence was there on the plane with you. How was he defending the operation?
Well, I think, he was just as surprised as I was. This was his first ICE Air flight to Central America, and I think we were both surprised when everyone on the plane began cheering, both when kind of Guatemalan territory appeared below us, and then when we were on the ground. In Latin America, people often clap when a flight lands safely, but in this case, people were really, I think, happy to be back. For some of them, it was their first time out of custody after months or maybe even years, behind bars. And so it was, they were returning to freedom. They hadn't seen their relatives in a long time, and I think there was just a kind of tremendous relief that their ordeal was finally over. Some people would definitely look sad, but I think particularly a lot of the young men there were very, very much relieved to be on the ground in Guatemala again.
And it's so fascinating. The plane lands, and there's the First Lady of Guatemala greeting all of these folks.
That's right. So the First Lady of Guatemala had come out to greet Albence, and also as part of this kind of effort, to give them this message to deportees that Guatemala is their home, that they're going to be treated well, and urging them to stay. This is something that the U.S. very much wants the Guatemalan government to be involved in, trying really to do anything to incentivize them to remain in Central America and remain in Guatemala.
And we know the president's vowed to deport millions of undocumented immigrants. But when you look at the data, it shows that ICE removals for most of the part have really declined since 2012. You write that the president's goal widely exceeds the government's abilities. What are the challenges there?
Well, I mean, this is physics really is the biggest challenge. I mean, the president says that ICE is going to deport millions, but really, what they do on an annual basis is far, far short of that. Fewer than 300,000. And in this case, for example, Guatemala right now is the single largest source of unauthorized immigrants to the United States. So far this year, more than 250,000 have crossed the border, whereas ICE deportations to Guatemala are only about 50,000. So 5 times more Guatemalans are crossing the border and arriving to the United States as are being deported.
I want to ask you also, there's a new president in Guatemala elected on Sunday, and you also report DHS is going to allow more photography and video recording inside of the Customs and Border Patrol facilities. What's behind this decision?
Yeah, well, my colleague Aurelis Hernandez has a great story today on the Post website about her visit to the McAllen Central Processing Center. That's the big warehouse where so many families and children in South Texas are held in Border Patrol custody. It's been the source of a lot of controversy because of the chain link detention pens that are used there that have been likened to cages. And, you know, one of the things that DHS keeps running into trouble with is that, you know, they have this need to really convince the public that there's a crisis and that things are truly an emergency at the border. But, you know, when they do open up and show the broader public what the reality of detention and the border conditions really are, that often comes back to bite them and ends up triggering even more anger and frustration.
Yeah, well, Nick, it was a fascinating report just to see what these flights are like and to be on board. Thank you very much, Nick Miroff with the Washington Post.
Thank you.